Hi friends, I hope this brief video finds you doing well. I know we all have a lot on our plate right now, and one of the last things you probably want reminding of is that it's annual review season. I know sometimes that feels like an afterthought in the midst of all that we have going on, but it's helpful that we stop and pause for a moment and recognize that conducting annual reviews is an important part in the professional development of our individual staff, and it's also important and critical to the health of our overall organization. So I want to take a few moments to share with you some of the basic principles that we want to employ in student affairs as we conduct those annual reviews. And to that end, I'm particularly indebted to the feedback that so many of you provided through our climate assessment survey in student affairs that was conducted last spring, and also the ongoing work of our climate assessment working group and the recommendations that they shared with leadership earlier this past semester. Let me start by saying that it's an expectation in student affairs that every supervisor provide accurate and honest assessments of an employee's performance in accordance with the definitions provided in accompanying the 3-point rating scale. We use 3 different ratings, as you'll recall: not meeting expectations, meeting expectations, and exceeding expectations. And each of those definitions provides additional detail about when and how they should be used. Now, let me stress that assigning a rating of meeting expectations is not a negative review. It indicates that an employee is consistently and continuously performing the expectations of their position throughout the course of the year. However, in appropriate instances, supervisors may consider using a rating of exceeds expectations, and they should do that consistent with the definition for that particular rating. Supervisors should not apply such a rating simply across the board, but neither should they categorically refuse to use a rating of exceeds expectations, especially if that's what's been merited by the employee's performance. To my mind, the key is that every rating that we assign should be rooted in a consistent and considered assessment of an employee's individual performance over the course of the year. I also want to acknowledge that if an employee believes that a performance rating is unfair, then they have certain grievance rights that are secured to them in various HR policies. Grievance policies are in place not only for the protection of the individual employee, but also to ensure the integrity of the grievance process as well as the performance rating process. And we want to make sure that those policies can be exercised without limitation. So I want to be clear that it's an expectation in student affairs that no employee should be discouraged from exercising the rights they have under any applicable grievance policy, and no form of retaliation will be tolerated. It is critically important that our employees feel as though those policies work for and in support of them. Finally, many or perhaps even most of you have already completed the training offered by our HR professionals with respect to conducting performance reviews. If you haven't done that, I strongly encourage you to complete that as soon as possible. We all have a collective responsibility to be good supervisors and to know and be able to learn more about how we can conduct effective and encouraging performance reviews. So please complete that training if you haven't already done so, and utilize the skills that you learn in conducting your reviews. I want to close by again just thanking all of you for the hard work that you're doing. This is an extraordinarily busy time, and I know that this can sometimes feel like one more thing to do, but it really is vitally important, and each of our employees will benefit from the strength of the reviews that we're able to provide and the honest, constructive feedback that will be contained in those reviews. So thank you for your good work, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. Bye-bye.
Hello, my name is Barbara Lesan, and I'm the Senior HR Director in Student Affairs. I want to talk to you about the annual appraisal process, but before getting into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about performance management. What is performance management? Michael Armstrong describes performance management as the continuous process of improving performance by setting individual and team goals which are aligned to the strategic goals of the organization, planning performance to achieve the goals, reviewing and assessing progress, and developing the knowledge, skills, and abilities of people. One of the key points that Mr. Armstrong makes in his definition is that performance management is a continuous process, That means it starts from the beginning of the evaluation period until the end of the evaluation period. Sometimes we tend to get more focused on just the annual appraisal part of performance management and not the actual totality of performance management. The overall success of our university relies on the individual accomplishments of all of its staff. The university has a performance management program in place for both its SHRA and EHRA employees. This performance management program allows for communicating performance expectations and evaluating the achievements of its employees. This approach helps to ensure that employees are performing efficiently throughout the year, and in the process, any issues that arise along the way can be addressed regarding an employee's performance. All permanent university employees, both SHRA and EHRA, are evaluated annually on their performance. Here in Student Affairs, both SHRA and EHRA employees are evaluated on institutional goals. The institutional goals are expertise, accountability, customer-oriented, team-oriented, compliance and integrity, and supervision for those employees that have supervisory responsibilities. Supervisors create 3 to 5 individual goals for each of their employees, and they provide clarity on what level of performance constitutes meeting those expectations. Supervisors are required to provide an annual overall performance rating that represents the supervisor's assessment of the employee's total performance during the entire performance cycle. This rating is based on a 3-point scale of exceeding expectations, meeting expectation, or not meeting expectation. Please continue to listen to this valuable training document that's been put together to provide support to supervisors and employees doing the performance evaluation process. There will be helpful information that will help guide you along the way. Thank you.
Greetings, and thank you for taking time to view the performance review training presentation for Student Affairs. If you attended the training sessions earlier this spring, you are aware that the information in the training sessions applied to both SHRA and EHRA performance reviews. However, there are a few differences between the review processes, and I wanted to take some time to share the similarities and differences. I'm going to share my screen and display a slide deck with more specific information. Several years ago, we revised the performance review process and forms in Student Affairs. At that time, the EHRA form was changed to model the SHRA evaluation form. The Student Affairs EHRA evaluation template has been recently provided in an email from Barbara Lesan and is also available from your respective HR representative. There are some slight differences between SHRA and EHRA review timeframes. Due to the COVID effect this year, the SHRA review period has been extended to June 30th. SHRA reviews should be completed during the month of July, and the review needs to be signed and reported by August 31st. The EHRA review period is the same as previous years, with the review period ending June 30th. EHRA reviews should be completed during the month of July, and the review needs to be signed and reported by July 31st. One of the differences between EHRA and SHRA reviews is the weighting of each goal. The SHRA review process requires a weighting, whereas the weighting for the EHRA review is optional. Although the rating criteria of not meeting, meeting, and exceeding are the same for both EHRA and SHRA employees, the rating criteria for SHRA employees requires a numerical score. Please note that the numerical score needs to be a whole number. Also note that the SHRA employees receive an overall final rating as a total score and then translates to the overall rating of not meeting, meeting, or exceeding. For EHRA employees, since there is no weighting or score, the overall final rating is based on a mode of the individual scores. The mode is the most common rating that occurs throughout the evaluation, and the chart provides several examples. Please note that if one of the individual goals is rated as not meeting, the overall rating cannot be exceeding, as shown in example 4. Another difference between EHRA and SHRA reviews is the appeal process. SHRA employees may appeal an overall rating of not meeting expectations. However, please note that individual ratings of not meeting are not eligible for appeal. There is not an appeal process for EHRA employees. Instead, the EHRA employees who have concerns should contact your respective HR representative or Barbara Lesan, Senior HR Director for Student Affairs. Employees also have the option to contact a member of UNC's Employee and Management Relations team. Finally, supervisors of SHRA employees are required to complete a competency assessment form, whereas this form is not applicable for the EHRA review process. As for similarities between the two processes, the expectations and requirements in the training session applies to both EHRA and SHRA performance reviews. Other elements that are the same include the rating criteria of not meeting, meeting, and exceeding, the institutional goals, and the talent development plan for all employees in student affairs that includes participating in an activity that will broaden the knowledge and skills in the areas of equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We hope you find the information in the training session helpful, and special thanks to Tyler Enlow, Senior Employee and Management Relations Consultant with UNC Human Relations, for sharing his time and expertise in the training sessions for employees and supervisors in student affairs.
Good morning again, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us here in person. Hello to everyone in the Campus Health conference room that's joining us by Zoom, as well as everyone else, all of the millions of other viewers who are Zooming in. We welcome you. You won't be seeing us in person this morning. Instead, you'll just be hearing our voices and the slide deck presentations. And so I just want to acknowledge that. If you do have any questions, you can type those questions in, and at the end of the session, we will be trying to respond to any of those questions. If we're not able to get to them during the time of this session, then we will follow up afterwards. Of course, we'll be taking questions in person from this group in the union this morning, and so there may be some questions that you're asking that other people would have also a question about. I want to acknowledge the importance of this particular activity, this training, because it's really a result of the feedback that we received from all of our employees in student affairs about the importance of supervisor training, and a specific recommendation to have all supervisors have a training touch point before we get into the evaluation process. And so thank you for that feedback, and I'm hoping that this is one of the many recommendations that we'll be following up on based on your feedback. Also want to acknowledge that the training is specifically for supervisors, but we have invited all members of student affairs to join the training so that they can actually hear the information that's being presented, ask any questions, and hopefully feel like they are also engaged and informed in the process. As we get started, I want to acknowledge a couple of individuals who have really worked tremendously hard to get us where we're at today. Chris Williams, our Director of Student Affairs IT, Stephanie Chang, who has helped us. Rebecca, I'm sorry. Chang, I don't know why I said Stephanie.
That's all right.
Who has helped us with the Zoom setup this morning. Barbara Lesan, who is our Director of Student Affairs HR. We have all of our HR associates in each one of the business hubs attending the training and providing assistance. And so if you happen to be in an area where you have access to one of those, or after this meeting, if you have questions, please feel free to follow up with those individuals as well. My last comment is to introduce Tyler Enlow, who is from Human Resources, who has graciously provided his time this morning to provide the training, provide us with some guidance, answer any questions. And so I am going to turn it over to Tyler. I'm going to need to be leaving the meeting a little early, and so Barbara will be following up with any other information as we close out the meeting. Again, welcome, and thank you very much for your time.
See, like you all, I was required to be here too by Dr. Payne, so good morning. Let me kind of introduce a little bit about who I am and you know, to whom I represent. So my role is within HR. I am an employee and management relations consultant. I am actually assigned to student affairs with you all. So I am your consultant, so should you have any questions, please reach out to me. My email is the easiest way to get to me, and it's Tyler.Enlow, E-N-L-O-W, not like the high school, at unc.edu, and that's how you can easily get in contact with me. But I also serve a dual purpose here at the university. I am the university's SHRA Performance Management Coordinator. So if you have any performance management questions, please let me know, and I can answer them to the best of my ability. However, there are some things about the process and about the policy I can't change. And the reason is this is actually a statewide policy. It's ran out of general administration, system office. I know it's not general administration anymore, system office. And it's the same at every institution in the UNC system. So there are some subtle differences we can do, like we have blue forms, you're welcome. But there's not a whole lot we can change. And I may have grabbed the wrong clicker.
Should be a just click on the screen, it's probably off.
Is that the clicker that you have?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
All right, well, we have a presentation at some point. And now we're working, maybe. All right, so let me just kind of talk about what performance management is as a whole and just kind of take a step back. So the whole point of the performance management system is to be a communication delivery system, okay? It's not a gotcha system. It's not a way in which, all right, we're back working, good. This isn't a way to go an entire year and then deliver something to the employee that the employee is not aware of, has never seen before, and has no idea why they're rated what they are. This is a communication system mostly to help an employee succeed. Because in the end, that's what we want, right? As supervisors, as employees. It is extremely inexpensive and not time-consuming, right, to go through the hiring process. Right, yes. A few people awake. We're going to wake everybody up. So the hiring system takes a while, right? So the whole disciplinary system takes a while, right? So to have somebody in a position that is not succeeding is not going to be advantageous to your group. We hire people to do jobs. They need to do those jobs. They need to do them well. So that's part of what this whole process is about. But you're going to hear something from me today a lot, and that is clarity, okay? You have to be clear in what the job expectations are. You have to be clear in what the job is, right? So how can you hold an employee accountable if you're not clear in what the job they're supposed to be doing and how well you expect them to do it? So be clear. Now, we often talk about roles and responsibilities, specifically when it comes to employees or managers, but I'm going to walk you through just kind of how we view the the roles and responsibilities. So, the employee, we're all employees here, right? Right? So our responsibility is to actively participate as an employee. When I say own the work, what do you think I mean? I'll play the Jeopardy music if you want. Be responsible. Be responsible. You got to be responsible for the job you have. Autonomy. We expect most employees to be autonomous, right? You don't need to keep constantly telling the employee what to do. It's also when there are issues and roadblocks that come up, speed bumps, to keep you informed, right? If there's an impediment to getting the job done, oftentimes you have to escalate that. So it is the responsibility of the employee to keep you informed, as well as ask questions if they don't know, because you as supervisors, are you mind readers? No. I'm going to go ahead and answer that. You're not mind readers, so you're not going to be able to know that an employee doesn't know something. So if something comes up, it's the employee's responsibility to ask questions. Supervisors, remember, clear. Be clear in the expectations and be honest in the appraisal. Be honest. So this is a call and answer. Everybody's taken a training with me before. You will have heard this before. If an employee is exceeding expectations, what do I expect to see?
A rationale as to why.
Rationale as to why. Thank you, Rustin. Yes. But what do I expect to see as the rating? Exceeding expectations. If the employee is not meeting expectations, what do I expect to see? Not meeting expectations. If the employee is meeting expectations, I expect to see meeting. Why do I say that? Because we do not have a quota system. Okay? We do not have we do not grade on a bell curve. Only the top 15% are exceeding. The employee is rated based on the expectations that you, the supervisor, set. It's not in comparison with each other. It's not like I said, I usually give an example, but I'll give you a quick example here as to what I mean. So Barbara and I report to Dr. Payne. Okay? Barbara and I both have to do 10 of X. Whatever X is, we have to do 10 of them. Okay? I do 10, and because Barbara is better than I am at everything, she does 15. That's a true statement. She does 15 of X. Okay? So if Dr. Payne looks at it and says that the exceeding expectations was 10 of X, but I get meet and Barbara gets exceed because Barbara did it better than I did, is that fair? Is that honest? What I'm saying is that if Dr. Payne sets the expectation that exceeds expectations is doing 10 of X, and we both did at least 10 of X, we should both get what? Exceeding expectations. It's not in comparison, right? We are not at odds with each other in competition. No, we are rated based upon the expectations that our supervisor set. So that's when I say honesty in appraisal. That's what I'm talking about, is being honest in the expectations that you've set. Now, over time, we may have to up the expectations or lower the expectations, depending on what's going on, but we need to be honest in what the employee has done in relation to what expectations we've set. When I say invest time up front, that means talking to us as employees, right? That means explaining to us what is expected. It is not a requirement to put down what the exceeds expectations is. Okay? That is not a requirement. It is required to write at the meets expectations level, all goals. But you do not have to write down what exceeds expectations is. However, my recommendation is you do. You may or may not know this, probably don't, because you all don't have to sit and listen to the phone calls I get. I get more phone calls on employees who say they should have gotten exceeds expectations and got meets than of employees who do not meet expectations. I get far more phone calls and far more people alleging nefarious acts based upon the fact they did not get exceeds expectations, but Joe did. Okay? If you put down the exceeds expectations, what do you think that does? That's you're being clear in what the expectation for exceeds is. If the employee does not reach that, you can go back to and say, this was the expectation, you did not reach this one. Does that make sense to everyone? It gives you a place to talk about. It gives the employee a bar to hit, and it gives them knowledge as to what your expectations are for exceeding them. Anybody in here a second level supervisor, which means you supervise supervisors? Got a few people, okay. You are to review and sign all performance plans, as well as all reviews, okay? My advice is that you all, as second level supervisors, receive that prior to the employee receiving it. Because your role is to ensure that the evaluations and the ratings are consistently applied throughout your group, in conjunction with other second level supervisors across the entire organization, okay? So, my advice is to give it to you all ahead of time. Why? Because if there's a change that needs to be made, the manager gets to make it, right? And guess what? They get to meet with the employee again. And if it's a lower rating, do you think they're going to be happy about that meeting? Probably not. So my suggestion is always to have that happen prior to the employee receiving it. Now, performance plans are a little different because sometimes employees, we all, in my shop, we always advise getting bias. So that means having the employee help you with writing the goals sometimes. They don't need to write them, let me be clear. That's the manager's responsibility. However, they should have input. So it might be that on performance plans, you get the second level supervisor to sign after you meet with the employee. That's possible, okay? Some people do both ways. But the review, I suggest going before the employee receives it. So, the appraisal cycle, performance cycle ends here in, what is today, the 10th? 21 days, okay? So, the appraisals are due April 30th. Just so you all know, in full transparency, the policy for the state is the end of May. You have 60 days. However, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, we have been given the ability to have our deadline earlier. Why? Because we are a very large institution, and I have to track people down. So I need time to do that so then I can get the scores to the system office. So that's why our date is April 30th. Now, yes?
So appraisals are due April 30th, not March 31st.
Right.
Okay, that's not what I was told.
Okay.
Okay.
They could be due earlier. That's definitely possible. And we do have some departments. I know School of Medicine has an earlier deadline, I believe. We have other areas that do have an earlier deadline, and one can be set departmentally. But yeah, the end of the cycle is March 31st, and the appraisals are due April 30th.
So clarification, when he says appraisals due April 30th, that's for the rating to actually be in Connect Carolina. So what that means is that the meeting has to occur with the employees by that time.
Prior to it.
The April 30th date is for the manager to have the information in Connect Carolina. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear, because what will happen is I'll actually push out a notification with the forms and scheduling with the dates that we want them to be completed in student affairs to allow the time for ratings to be entered on April 30th. And I'm not trying to criticize or throw shade. Y'all didn't know I was that cool. But just to let folks know, if we say they're due on April 30th, then we're going to have managers, on April 30th at 4:59 saying, I've almost met with my employees. But that's not the case. That's not going to work for us because they have to have that information to transmit up to the system office by April 30th. So they need to be complete. The cycle ends on March 31st, and at that time, you can begin with that. You could have it a little bit before then, but if something were to happen in those days, before the end of the cycle that need to be accounted for, but I just want to make sure that's clear. Because in the system, Tyler's going to get to it, and I'm sorry that I jumped in.
Oh, no, you're good.
I wanted to be clear about that because there's some confusion.
And Barbara, should we get to that date, what happens when we have ones that haven't gotten into the system? I always send you a nice email, don't I, about all the people we got run down. So that nice email then becomes less nice when we have to go further into the system. So we're hoping, and the university has yet to do this, get to 100% done by April 30th. But that will always be a goal for mine, to get that. That might be exceeding expectations, but I'm trying to get there. And thanks for that, Barbara. You're right. That is the deadline to get it into Connect Carolina. And you do have to meet with the employee prior to putting it into Connect Carolina, because the second you hit submit, the employee can see the score. So make sure you're meeting with the employee prior to putting it in the system. That does not mean on April 30th, I'm going to go online, I'm going to enter these ratings so I don't get in trouble. No, you have to meet with the employee first. Okay, make sure of that, because if we find out later that that's not happened, that becomes very problematic, and we will have a discussion. I can promise you that. One thing and Nadia, I know you have a question. One thing I do want to make sure I state also is, actually we'll get to that in a second.
Sorry.
Okay.
So, what if last year when you did this, you set, like, the cycle things, there's still things that employees said they'll accomplish by June or May. So if I am to rate them on March 31st this year, we didn't get to that yet, what should I do?
Okay, so if you have a deadline that extends beyond this performance cycle, which we do have goals, sometimes when we write goals, they're based on different calendars than our performance year, which is possible. You need to rate them based upon their performance up until that point. They may not have had the deadline to quote unquote get it done, but you should be able to then have a day-to-day monitoring of how they have performed to that point, which then you can rate on that point.
Nadia, if you're speaking in real with EHRA, so this is for SHRA cycle. EHRA cycle runs from July 1 to June 30th.
Okay.
So that time will be encompassed there. And this was probably, I'll just go ahead and, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, jump in.
We have supervisors of both in here. EHRA performance review cycle runs from July 1 into June 30th of the year. EHRA performance cycles and performance reviews are a little bit different. They still have setting the expectation goals and whatnot, but it's not actually under this same program, Tyler, because there is not, if you quote me, correct me, it's not grievance covered.
No, it is not.
Policy there, and with EHRA employment being at will. So there's some differentiations there. And when EHRA appraisal time starts to grow closer, there will be information pushed out about that.
And the two main differences also, you got SHRA performance PM process is governed by state policy, state law. EHRA is not. So we have a little more flexibility with EHRA non-faculty. All right, one thing I do want to also hit, yes.
I'm really sorry.
It's okay.
So, are you saying, Barbara, that EHRA cannot, if they get an appraisal that they do not agree with, they cannot, what's the word?
Grieve it.
Grieve it, yeah.
They cannot.
EHRAs are able to, employees.
That's here. I cannot speak for the rest of the system.
Okay, I came out of another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a part of the UNC Chapel Hill grievance policy for EHRA non-faculty. SHRA employees can grieve only for an overall not meeting expectations, and it does not go beyond it's part of the university's grievance process, does not go to Office of Administrative Hearings. It ends here. All right, so the appraisal process and the appraisal itself needs to cover the totality of the work, okay? It does not just cover the last 3 months leading up to the evaluation. All right, that's recency bias. It does not cover the first 3 months or 4 months of the performance cycle. That's primacy bias. All right, we're talking about the totality of the work throughout the year, okay? In preparation, you can request self-evaluations. I don't know if anybody does here, but you can. All right, the self-evaluations, however, if you requested of one employee, guess what? Requested of all employees. You don't single one person out. So everybody should do it in your unit if you are requiring them. However, if the employee wants to do one themselves out of their own free will, go ahead. One thing, I also always state this: supervisor should provide the employee with the appraisal in advance. Several reasons why. One, not all of us read the same speed. So if you're just giving it to them at the conference, you're sitting there wasting time for both of you all while one party reads it. Another thing, those things are always contentious. Who doesn't get nervous when you go in for your appraisal, right? So you're sitting there nervous, trying to read fast, you're going to miss things, okay? I'm speaking as an employee myself. I would miss things, all right, and I read very fast. So my suggestion is to give it to them in advance so they can sit at home or sit in their office and read the review prior to meeting with you. So maybe they have comments, questions, that can be, so you can have a better discussion about the appraisal. An employee, remember I said this is not a gotcha system. So the employee should not be surprised at the rating they receive. If an employee is not meeting expectations, they should be aware of performance deficiencies throughout the year. And you, the supervisor, should have been addressing them throughout the year, okay? If the employee is exceeding expectations, they should know they're exceeding throughout the year. Or if they're meeting, they should know they're meeting. However, there is one thing I do always want to go back to. There's something I like to call sticker shock. It's the difference between knowing that I'm not meeting expectations and seeing it on the official document, okay? And if I see it on the official document, that may cause a visceral reaction. And we would prefer that that happen in private. Why? Because we would prefer not to have to take care of a conduct issue as well. I've had people crumble it up and throw it in the trash. Have yet to see somebody light it on fire. But we want to make sure, that's not an idea, don't do that. But we want to make sure that the employees have time to compose themselves to come in to have that conversation. If you're in a situation where you're having the meeting and you can feel that it's going a route that is less than positive, you can say, hey, how about we take a 5-minute break, right? Or how about you go get something to drink, come back, and we can resume this conversation. Or, hey, let's resume this conversation tomorrow. Something along those lines you can do. Okay, we make sure we're getting into a place where the employee is getting upset or you, the supervisor, are getting upset, and let's at least have a break so neither person says something they wish they could take back. And then you can see me. All right? Employee must have worked for the state for at least 6 months to receive an evaluation. At least 6 months. Okay? Notice I said for the state. Did not say for student affairs. I did not say as a business services coordinator at the journey level. I'm saying for the state. So if we have a transfer coming from another state institution and there's not a break in service, that person still would receive an evaluation if they've been here if they've been with the state for at least 6 months. Same thing if they came from DHHS or think of another one, DPS.
If they started in January, can I still conduct one in May or June? Not call it annual, call it like.
We'll get to probationary in a minute,
Okay.
yeah. And it's different if it's EHRA versus SHRA. But we'll talk about probationary reviews for SHRA employees in a minute. Any questions about this? All right. So, once again, we're rating based upon the expectations that you, the supervisor, have set. I did put up avoid nitpicking on minor infractions because you'd be amazed how many times I see something written in the evaluation, something along the lines of the employee, and this I have seen, the employee was late 2 times this year. 2. Is that something anybody should see in an evaluation? No. So don't nitpick. Just please. It's going to come across as the supervisor doesn't like me. It's going to create a situation that we have to handle. So do not nitpick. When I say use more observation and less inferences, that's more of your personal observation of the employee's performance. You can use other information. For instance, in my unit, my supervisor reaches out to my campus colleagues, so like Barbara, and says, how did Tyler perform for you all this year? Talk to my client, all the clients that I work with. So you can do that. But if there's a deficiency and the employee is not performing, I'm going to ask, why did you not observe them? Right? So even if it's flybys, even if it's, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But we do want to be including more concrete observations. You want to emphasize above and below. Reasons being is above, that's exceeding. That's what we want the employee to continue to do, right? We all would love all of our employees to exceed. So make sure we're noting to the employee, this is what exceeding looks like. Keep doing that. Below, because we want to talk about this is where you're not meeting. This is where deficiencies are. And if we have an employee who has been, let's say, they've been deficient for 8 months with their performance, and we haven't addressed it, I'm going to come to you, the supervisor, and say, why haven't we addressed this? Why have we allowed somebody to perform at a below expectation, or not meeting expectations, for a year? It's a long time. So like I said, you want to emphasize above and below. And this last question, you definitely need to be asking yourself, what is driving this rating? Why does this employee receive this rating? And please make sure it's not an illegal reason. And then you give an overall, just how has the employee met the expectations, kind of a wrap-up comments. I put this on here for a reason. You must hold the one-on-one with the employee. Remember what I was talking about? You must meet with them prior to entering into Connect Carolina. It's part of the policy. You got to meet with them. If you have employees who are teleworking, say from I work with DC Research. We've got people all over the world. Well, we can Skype. We can do other things to make sure we have that one-on-one meeting. But it's really hard for me to say this, that specifically we have employees here on this campus, you didn't meet with them. Any questions about that? So I did like this. This actually came from one of the student affairs slides. I really like this definition to kind of give people an example as to what we mean by not meeting, meeting, and exceeding. Not meeting, you'll see consistently on there. This isn't just like a one-time thing. However, if an employee's one-time thing is so bad they receive a disciplinary action for it, then that changes the calculus a little bit because disciplinary actions affect ratings. Okay, but not consistently not meeting the expectations, consistently meeting the expectations, and consistently exceeding the expectations. Those are what we look at when we define if an employee is exceeding, meeting, or not meeting expectations. Oh, sorry. And I think the slides will be going out to everybody, I'm sure. Okay, so scoring. 3, 2, or 1. 3 meaning exceeds, 2 meaning meets, 1 meaning does not meet expectations. You do not have the option to put down a 1.25. You do not have the option to put down a 2.5. They were almost exceeding this year. You don't have that option. It's a 1, a 2, or a 3. Reason being, a 2.5, that sounds a lot like very good. We got rid of that. There's no more very good. There's either meeting or exceeding consistently. Okay? To be very clear, everybody online, a 1, 2, or 3. Because if I see it come in with anything other than that, you're going to have to redo it.
Tyler, do you mean for?
The individual ratings.
The individual for each of the?
Yeah, for each of the individual goals and each of the institutional goals, you can only give a 1, 2, or 3. Now, when you multiply it by the weighting and everything, you will get a 1 point whatever or 2 point whatever. So, now the overall rating, 2.7 to 3.0 is exceeding, 1.7 to 2.69 is meeting, and then, of course, 1.0 to 1.69 is not meeting. You see a caveat next to exceeds expectations. What do you think that might mean? Those of you who don't already have the slides.
Justification, explanation.
It means that it is statistically possible to receive a rating that would fall between a 2.7 and 3.0 and have a 1 rating, or 2 potentially, of 1. If an employee receives any rating of 1 or has a disciplinary action, which would then result in having a rating of 1, for any individual or institutional goal, they cannot be exceeding expectations, even if the rating falls between 2.7 and 3.0. Now, I understand that might have some of you thinking, I don't understand why. The state's justification as to why that is for an employee to receive an overall rating of exceeds expectations, the employee must have met all aspects of their job for your expectations. They must have at least a meet for every aspect of their job. Okay? And this is just a breakdown of weighting and scoring. As you can see, if everything is weighted 10%, all things being equal, the difference between exceeding and meeting expectation is 8.1. Yes, sir.
So, back to the last slide.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put this in context of like in a classroom.
Okay.
You're saying that if I take 4 tests for the year,
Mm-hmm.
I fail 1, make 100 on the other 3,
Mm-hmm.
I can't get an A even though my average comes out to be an A.
If you're talking in terms of statistics, yes. However, the analogy is different. And the reason why I say the analogy is different is because you didn't, in this case, you didn't just fail tests. You failed for an entire year. So it's a little different. I understand the analogy, and the analogy is, the percentages is correct. Those are correct, statistically. However, the reason why the state views it this way is that, and oftentimes when somebody does receive a not meeting expectation, it is because of a disciplinary action. So your performance or your conduct, I'm using the royal you, is so egregious that we had to go down a disciplinary path. At that point, there's no way you should be exceeding expectations. Also, then we might have an issue with discounting a disciplinary action as well. So there are other implications. But I understand where you're coming from. But let's say you have an attendance problem, and so you're receiving 1 for team-oriented. If the employee is not showing up for work on time or not showing up for work, should they exceed expectations even though they're a great technician? Any other? Any? Oh, no. Okay. Good.
With the disciplinary action,
Mm-hmm.
it's 18 months?
It is.
Okay, so if somebody got something, say, 9 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
hypothetically,
Mm-hmm.
then, or say 11 months, 13 months ago.
Okay, so you're going through a different cycle.
Right.
All right.
Right, so what about that?
The question was having to do with the disciplinary action. Disciplinary actions are now active for 18 months, which is a shift from the previous policy, which was 12 months, and that was for us to get in line with the state policy. State agencies have always been 18 months, or at least to my knowledge. I've been in the state of North Carolina. So the question is, if individual receives a disciplinary action in another cycle, in a previous cycle, which is possible given the time length, what to do with this cycle. And it would have to be on a case-by-case basis. If the employee's performance has gotten to the point where they now are no longer deficient, then let's talk about what that rating should be. Because once again, we're honest and we're clear about our expectations. If they met it for this year, then let's talk about that, specifically when we're looking at the end of the 18-month period. But if it's within the cycle, then the way the policy is written, the employee should receive a 1 for whatever institutional or individual goal is intertwined with that written warning or disciplinary action. And that's once again for SHRA, because EHRA do not have disciplinary action. Okay? So, rating bias. There's a larger worksheet within the toolkit, the manager toolkit. Who has been the manager toolkit? A few people? I highly suggest going, because there's a lot of good information there. It's at hr.unc.edu. Go to Employee and Management Relations, and you'll see a manager toolkit. Within there, you'll see a rater bias worksheet that walks through all the different types of rating biases there. At the same time, there's also a UNC system institutional goals worksheet I was just pulling off. It gives you a 3-column, walks through language for not meeting expectations, meeting expectations, and exceeding expectations. But in this case, like I said, we already talked about primacy and recency bias. Leniency bias, rating people higher than they deserve. Obviously, severity is going the other route, rating them worse than they deserve. And then I always make sure, and we already mentioned this with the example that I gave about Barbara and my performance. Normative is rating all employees the same. No employee gets and exceeds expectations. Everybody has to be meets. Comparative bias is, once again, comparing two employees' performance, not comparing the employee versus the expectations that you have set. Well, so, I do want to make because we're ending one cycle and beginning another, I did want to at least touch base on the performance plan itself. So, the individual goals are the hardest part, right? Who here has written a performance plan? Enjoy writing those goals, don't we? So, it's 3 to 5 per year. It's not intended to cover the totality of the work. Why? The institutional goals cover that. The institutional goals cover every aspect of the employee's work. The individual goals are meant to look at 3 to 5 specific things throughout the year that you are looking at as a supervisor, that they've risen to the level that these are so important that we're going to write a goal about them, and it's going to be worth 50% of your score. Okay? Once again, you're writing it at the meets expectations level. Okay, at the meet, not at the exceeds, you're writing it at the meet. However, remember my recommendation from the beginning that we talked about. If you can, let's write the exceeds expectations down. That's my recommendation. You're not required, but that is my recommendation. And then also, if you have groups that have like positions, it's easier for managers to write goals together. Okay? Let me give you an example. I work with VC Research. Part of VC Research is the Division of Comparative Medicine. It used to be called Division of Lab Animal Medicine. They have, across the wide span of their organization, they have a lot of very like positions. So every year I sit down with their assistant operations directors, and we come up with what the goals will be for the year, for everyone. Housekeeping is another unit that does a lot of the same thing. They have set goals that they run through. They change them, but they're very similar and they're the same across the whole. Okay? So there are ways to do that if you have like positions. Now, when you talk about function, I want you to think about the what of the goals. Okay? The what of the goal. So what are we asking the employee to do? These are just some guidelines on easy ways to write goals, one of which is a deal breaker goal. Now, Victoria, I know you sat through our previous training about this, so you'll hear this again, but we do a performance management disciplinary actions course. It's a 3-day class. It's all in the mornings. I highly suggest taking that class if you can. But a deal breaker is typically for anything that if you have not done this one thing this year, you have not done your job. However, and oftentimes in position descriptions, you'll see it as the highest percentage for the position. However, it could be changing on a year-to-year basis. So let's say this year you have an audit coming, whatever that audit is in your group, and you have an employee who does audit work. Is it going to be important this year? Yes, we don't like to fail audits, do we? Oh. So that whatever, let's say it was 10% of the job, this year it's very important. Not that it isn't important every year, but it's a much higher percentage this year given that we have an external audit coming in. So you can do it on a year-to-year basis. Project-oriented, these are the easiest ones to write. Okay? Why? Because projects tend to have a beginning and end date. They tend to have specific deliverables that are going to be asked of the employee. All right? So you can definitely write project goals. And then you have forward-focused goals. Okay? Like I said, these are the hardest to write because oftentimes it focuses more on the employee than necessarily the position. Oftentimes we're looking at the position. When I say scope, I'm looking at the whom of the goal, or the who. These are the people who you're asking to do the goal. So it could be division-wide, could be a work unit, or it could be employee-specific. Okay. So for instance, I have a training goal for performance management. I am the performance management coordinator, so that's specific to me. Okay. Anybody know what I mean when I say division-wide goal? You want an example? No? Want to move on? I'll give you an example. All right, so this is an example of a division-wide goal that is also what we call cascading. So it starts at the top, comes all the way to the bottom. So the university, let's say, has a green goal. You know, everybody know when I want to say green? All right, right. Everybody follow me so far. So the university says we're going to be more green this year. So the Vice Chancellor for the Office of Human Resources and Equal Opportunity and Compliance, Dr. Becky Mangini, says, you know what? Let's reduce paper waste. All right, so then the ABC over OHR, Link Butler, decides, all right, we're going to reduce paper waste by 20% in all of OHR. Okay? However, there are individuals who are within OHR who may not use a lot of paper. For instance, we have an IT professional. Chris, do you all use a lot of paper?
I hope not.
So IT-related positions tend to do things mostly online. So would a paper waste goal reduction, would that work for him? Probably not. So you can have variations based on the employee roles. So we would go with something else for him. That's a cascading goal. So, when you write goals, you write them smarter. And most people have heard of SMART goals, but But here at UNC Chapel Hill, we are smarter. Specific. You have to write them specific. Remember, we've been talking all morning about clarity, being clear. So part of being clear is being specific as to what you, the supervisor, are asking of the employee. Most goals tend to be vague and ambiguous. That's not how you write goals. Make sure we're writing them specific to what you, the supervisor, are asking of the employee. M is measurable. It needs to be measurable. It doesn't necessarily have to be quantitative. It could be qualitative, okay? But it needs to be measurable. Another thing that's really important, make sure that that measure is actually measuring the employee's performance. Anybody taking BEST? Yeah, BEST people. All right, within BEST, we have an individual named Renee Rogers. Remember, everybody's favorite employee. So, Renee Rogers was asked that she had to work travel grants within 5 days of the travel return date. And we talked through, that's not an accurate measure, is it? Because it's not measuring Renee's performance. What if she doesn't get everything from the PIs or whoever's doing the traveling? So we changed it, if you remember, later stages of the course to within 5 business days of receipt of. So make sure when we're writing our measures that we're actually measuring the employee's performance, not the happenstance around them. Achievable. It can be difficult, but it needs to be achievable for a reasonable person to be able to do it. Relevant. Makes sense? It needs to be relevant to the job. I'm not going to have a goal that requires me to do brain surgery. It's not a good thing. I have shaky hands. Time bound. Needs to have a deadline. Now, there is inherently a time boundness to all goals. Why? There's an end of the cycle. But one of the things I always talk about is that you do not have to make the end of the cycle the deadline. You can make it earlier. I have managers every once in a while come and talk to me about, they can't create the new performance plan because they don't know if the employee's completed the previous performance plan. They don't know if they've completed the previous goals. Well, you can set that earlier deadline. Set it March 1st. That way you have time to evaluate if the employee has completed the goal. All right, so E, expectations. Is it ethical? Hopefully. Please tell me it's ethical. But there's 2 things on there you may not expect to see. Exciting and enjoyable. Armchair psychology. People do what they like. People do what they enjoy. So if you have a goal and the employee enjoys it, it may not be a bad idea to have them do it. For instance, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I enjoy getting up in front of people and talking. So I have a training goal. Because we have to do some training. Tyler likes doing it, so let's throw him up there. I'm going to go take a nap after this, though, because I'm going to be worn out. That introvertness coming out. But once again, even though you might have somebody, like for me, I have a training goal because I enjoy doing trainings. However, that does not absolve the rest of my team and my colleagues from doing training themselves. So my suggestion is do not take tasks away from other people because you're not going to have necessarily an even trade going back to the other individuals. So just because an employee enjoys doing it does not mean let's take all this function away and give it only to Tyler. Well, if I'm out doing trainings all the time, I still have to do consultations. I still have to run the performance management system. I have other things I do as well amongst my team. Well, now I'm taking on additional work, and my colleagues aren't picking up behind me. Make sense? All right. Last one, resources. Number 1 resource you have is time. So, if you are writing a goal that is going to be worth in total, the individual goals are worth 50%, and we'll get to that in a second, of the total rating the employee receives, and you don't give the employee time to complete that goal, that's a problem. So if there is an issue where there may be shifting priorities, or you might have new leadership coming in, that you need to, let's say, we need to pull away from this goal and do another one, then just making an amendment to the performance plan, okay? We can't rate an employee on something they didn't have time to do. Now, if they just found themselves lost a lot, that might be another problem. Or they spend a lot of time on Amazon. But when you're writing a goal, Normally we do an exercise, but we're running up on time, so I'm just going to skip it. But there is a business services coordinator that you could practice on if you so choose. So like I said, we're running right up on time. So other performance appraisals, other than just the annual, you have interim reviews. If you have an employee who receives any rating of not meeting expectations, not just overall, any rating, you are required to do a mid-cycle review. The university has not been great at doing this. All right, it's due in October. However, this year, and Barbara knows this from HR Council, this year, I'm sending out a spreadsheet to capture all the individuals who receive any not meeting, so that I can follow up and ensure that we are compliant. Okay, so just so you know, you may get a follow-up about it. Employees can request reviews. That's something that not many people know. But it can be done anytime as long as it's not within the last 60 days of a previous review. And guess what, supervisors, you have to do it. However, that can be done once. So as supervisors, you do have to do that. All right, another thing, employees can respond, kind of getting back to the original question, Alexandra, that you were asking about if you don't agree with something. An employee can, at any point, attach a document to the review, okay, at any point. I advise within 2 weeks of the review why people get busy and forget about it, and if an employee wants to do that, I encourage them to do so, okay? Now that would go to the departmental HR, because that's where performance management or performance reviews are held at the moment until we go online. So make sure they're doing that. But also there's a box now that the internal HR will mark to ensure that people know that something is attached to it. Because guess what? Paper clips and staples are notoriously unreliable. So we'll make sure that people know that there should be something attached to it. All right, any questions about that? We're running up on time. So Barbara, do we have anything online? Any questions?
I have been seeing them back. They had the question regarding, do you have any suggestions of best practices for soliciting that type of customer slash peer feedback? You can just send them an email asking them, I'm compiling client reviews of employees' performances. Can you kind of just give me it depends on what format they want it in. I would highly suggest not sending the form itself. I know that's been done before. I wouldn't do that. I would just ask them to give some comments on the employee's performance. I wouldn't ask them to rate it. I would just ask for some comments. You can tell by the comments how the employees performed, but I wouldn't say, I need you to fill out this, how they do on team-oriented, stuff like that. No, I wouldn't ask that. I would just ask for some comments. Are supervisors required to conduct one-on-one meetings with the employees during the year to track the status of performance and development goals in preparation to the annual performance appraisal?
It's a great question. The question is, are managers required to have one-on-ones throughout the year? Managers are not required to do that. But at the same time, I would say if you're not meeting with the employee on a semi-regular basis, how do they know how they're performing? And most people around here do one-on-ones. I don't know if managers in the room, how you all feel about that. I have one-on-ones every week on Friday morning where I talk to my supervisors. It doesn't have to be every week. Sometimes I know some people do it once a month, some people do it every 2 weeks. How you do that is up to you, but my advice is to do some sort of one-on-one at least every 2 weeks. And part of that is due to operational needs. Some of that's due to shifting in priorities. I mean, a lot of information can be disseminated in that. It's not just about performance management, but it should at least have to some degree, talk about performance. And specifically if there are deficiencies, it needs to be more often.
And this question I think it will probably depend on the situation, but what is suggested when the employee gets a low score on their performance but never got a disciplinary action during the year? The supervisor did not provide feedback on the status of the performance and development goals during the one-on-one meeting.
That's very specific. That might be better handled with me one-on-one. Let me put it this way: just because an employee has received a 1 on an individual or institutional goal does not mean necessarily that there should be a disciplinary action associated with it. However, if that is a prolonged deficiency, then let's have a conversation as to why that's not occurred. But the employee should be aware that they're deficient, and it should, like I said, it should be addressed. That could be addressed in documented counseling throughout the year. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go directly to a disciplinary action, but once again, like I said, if it's prolonged, then I would like to have a conversation as to why that we have not progressed, because clearly something we're doing is not working. Whatever the process is, we need to change it up to ensure that employee is now on the path to proficiency.
Is it true that if you have a 1, that in the training and development area, there should be something there to address that 1, whether or not there's a disciplinary action? There should be a resource provided?
That's a great way to put it. Yes, Chris, there is. So if you have any rating of 1, and you need to have a corrective action plan that goes in the developmental goals section, it's not rated. So once again, people say, well, if there's a corrective action plan and they didn't do it, or they failed, or whatever it may be, why is it not rated? I would say, let's say I got a 1 for team-oriented for attendance. It's the easiest one to go with, right? So I have a corrective action plan now to get me to proficiency to correct my attendance. However, if I didn't do it again the next year, I'm still receiving a 1 for team-oriented. So that's where it's rated. But yes, you're right. It should be a corrective action plan. The easiest way, it should be in the body of the comments for the evaluation, and then just copy and paste it out of that into the developmental goals section. The corrective action plan, not all the comments.
The rating, next question, the rating definitions, are those intended to use across SHRA and EHRA employees? For example, the definition of not meeting expectations, is it the same for both?
I can't speak on the EHRA because I don't run that program, but the definitions for SHRA, it can, in my mind, go across both. But once again, I don't run that program, so I couldn't tell you definitively.
Next question, this is EHRA again, so I'll definitely get some information out. It says, can an EHRA staff also request a review at any time during the cycle? And so, of course,
I don't know. I'm shaking my head. I don't know.
And what I'll have to provide some feedback on that during the, because there can be an off-cycle review, and so I'm not trying to put you on the spot. These are just the ones that are popping up here.
One thing I didn't mention, because we didn't get into probationary too much, and Nadia had asked about it. So in individual, if there are probationary employees, you have to do quarterly reviews. So here's my advice. Do your reviews in April, July, October, January. Follows the performance calendar. As my boss put it, remember J-Joe. Not quite J-Lo, but J-Joe. All right, so January, April, July, October. No matter when they're hired. So you have an employee that starts in February, you're doing one in April. You have an employee that starts in March, you're doing one in April. Reason being is it keeps it straight. If you have multiple employees who are probationary, it becomes hard to remember to whom am I doing a review, what day, what month. It just keeps it a little more structured. The other thing is that remember the annual is in April, the mid-cycle is in October. It helps you just stay on that path.
One more question, and it's SHRA related.
Good, I like it.
If an employee has not achieved/completed the goal that is in alignment with SMARTer, do we rate them as not meeting?
If they've not achieved it, yeah, they're by definition not meeting. But if it's something, though, that comes in, I know we had a question about deadlines, and let's say the deadline is March 1st, but you sometime in January or December, you got word from, let's say it's Vice Chancellor Saul, right, that now we are changing our priorities, and the person couldn't get done that goal. Well, was that within their performance? Was that their performance, or was it other things happening unto them? That's one thing I would look at is that if it's something that was outside of the employee's control, or let's say you lost 2 positions and you couldn't hire for them, so the person was now running around, putting out fires the entire time, maybe didn't have a chance to get to that goal. Well, let's take that into consideration, because if it's outside the employee's control, I would say then by definition they have not met. Double negative.
training for EHRA supervisors for student affairs specifically?
I don't know, I can't answer that.
And so, we are working on that because of the fact that EHRA is just a little bit different and how we're going to put that together. Like, for example, how Tyler came over, from OHR, that there's not training like that provided by the EHRA consultants, just simply because of the nature of the EHRA position. But there will be some training available, and we are putting that, still getting that arranged and put together since we have a little bit more time here before the actual EHRA cycle ends. And if you have questions regarding, I'm saying it, hopefully everyone can hear me since out there, the millions that Dr. Payne was talking about. If you have questions specifically for EHRA that, of course, Tyler's not able to address right now, please reach out to your departmental HR representatives with those questions, and they can get those fed back to me so we can get those addressed for answers if you have those questions. I want to take this time because we are straight up at time, 10 a.m., and to thank Tyler for coming over and having this training. I hope it was helpful. And thank you all for taking time out to come out and have this session with us today.
Greetings, and thank you for taking the time to review the training session we provided for supervisors earlier this spring. At that time, we invited all supervisors and employees in student affairs to attend the training sessions, and we recorded the presentation so we could send it for reference as we begin the performance review process. As mentioned by Interim Vice Chancellor Sauls, the performance review process is one of the most important professional development activities we conduct in student affairs. Feedback from the recent climate assessment indicated an interest in providing annual performance review training for supervisors. We took this suggestion one step further to include all employees in student affairs so everyone could hear the same information and expectations. We invite your comments regarding the training provided this year, and you are welcome to reach out to me or your respective HR representative if you have any questions. Thank you for your extra time and commitment to the performance review process.